All right, ready for a deep dive. Today, it's Plato's Laws.
Not as famous as the Republic, you're right.
Definitely not,
Hmm.
but maybe even more radical when you really get into it.
It might be, yeah.
Like,
Especially in some ways.
and you're into philosophy, so we're gonna really dig into all those nuances.
Hmm.
Like, what's going on here? What's Plato really saying?
Absolutely.
We're talking about Plato's vision for this second best city he calls Magnesia,
Yeah.
which, right off the bat, makes you wonder,
Yeah.
what did he consider first best, if not the Republic?
Right. It is a puzzle. It really is. Especially since, Laws is one of his last works.
Right.
So it really makes you think, are we seeing like a shift in his thinking?
Oh, interesting.
And the thing is, Laws isn't just about laws. I mean, it's not like some dry legal document. It's more like a treatise on ethics, psychology, even the nature of the gods.
The whole shebang.
The whole shebang, exactly.
Okay, so first things first, set the scene for us. How is Laws structured compared to the Republic?
Well, like a lot of Plato's work, Laws is a dialogue. We got these three characters, an Athenian stranger, a Spartan, and a Cretan. And they're just walking to a temple, right? Just, having a conversation, chatting about laws and, how to govern.
Yeah.
But then the Cretan, he kind of reveals he needs some help. He's got to design the laws for this new city, this Magnesia.
Uh-huh.
And that's where the dialogue really takes off, That's where we get the blueprint for this second best utopia.
And Plato actually calls it second best straight up, doesn't he?
He does.
I feel like I remember that quote.
Yeah, it's right there in Laws 739A3, 740C3.
Oh.
Almost like he's saying, look, this isn't perfect, but it's the best we can do, really, given how things are.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Which, leads to this huge debate. Did he, abandon the idealism of the republics?
Right.
Or is this more like a pragmatic kind of concession, to just how messy human nature is?
Oh, that's a great point. I mean, if even Plato's saying second best, what does that tell us about how he views politics in general?
Right.
But here's where things get even more interesting, I think.
Okay.
So we've got this idea of community of property,
Yeah.
which was central to the Republic, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in the Laws, it's applied to all the citizens,
That's right.
not just the guardian.
Not just the elite.
Yeah, so that's arguably way more radical, isn't it?
I would say it is. I mean, there's no private land ownership. Everything belongs to the city. And then the city assigns plots of land to each household. And there's a fixed number of households, 5,040,
Wow.
which is another interesting feature, right?
Yeah.
He's really trying to control growth, limit corruption.
He's trying to design this perfectly balanced ecosystem almost.
Right.
Like
Yeah,
he's quarantining.
quarantining them from bad ideas.
Yes. Like limiting trade
Yeah.
and contact with outsiders.
Yeah, exactly. He was really concerned about corruption, wealth, foreign ideas, that whole pursuit of profit just for its own sake. He really thought that would just undermine people's pursuit of virtue. And that's the foundation of any just city.
Right, of course. So even with all these restrictions, this is not a simple society by any means.
Oh, no, not at all.
So walk me through some of the other specifics. What makes this city tick?
Well, for one, he's, I think, surprisingly progressive when it comes to women.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in Magnesia, women are citizens.
What?
They can hold office.
Okay.
Which, if you think about the context of Athens at that time, that was completely unheard of.
Yeah, that's pretty surprising given what we know about ancient Greece, right?
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how much his views on gender evolved between the Republic and Laws.
Yeah.
What else is unique about Magnesia?
Well, he has this very detailed legal system, much more intricate than Athens had at the time.
Yeah.
We're talking courts, appeals, different types of judges. He's really emphasizing due process here.
Interesting.
He's really thinking deeply about, how to make sure justice isn't just done, but it's seen to be done.
It's really fascinating how you have this blend of radical ideas, but then these surprisingly practical details too.
Yeah.
But the big question, I think, is how do you make people want to live in this city? How do you make them embrace being virtuous? In the Republic, it was all about those philosopher kings leading the way. What's the approach in Laws?
That's where we see a major shift, I think.
Okay.
So he introduces this idea of persuasion.
Okay.
Citizens have to be convinced that these laws are actually good, valuable. You can't just force them.
Right.
He uses this great analogy of a free doctor. So imagine, a doctor explains your illness. They explain the treatment, and you choose to follow their advice because you understand why it's beneficial.
Interesting. So it's not enough for the laws to just be good. They have
Yeah.
to be explained well. That's a huge responsibility for the lawmakers, isn't it?
It is. It's a big one. It's almost like they need to be philosophers themselves, right?
Yeah.
That's where this concept of preludes comes in. They're basically like ethical introductions to each law.
Okay.
They explain the reasoning, what's the moral purpose behind this law.
I see.
And they're meant to cultivate genuine understanding, not just blind obedience.
Yeah. That makes sense. But, it makes me wonder if that kind of creates an intellectual elite in Magnesia.
Oh, that's a good point.
Like, are there those who really get the philosophy behind it?
Right.
And then are there those who are just kind of, along for the ride?
Yeah. Are they assuming that everyone has this level of philosophical literacy?
Right. Exactly.
Or are these preludes supposed to be so good, so effective, that it just elevates everyone's understanding? It's a big question.
Yeah. It really gets to the heart of, how attainable virtue is in this system.
It does.
And speaking of elites, we can't avoid talking about this nocturnal council, this mysterious group we mentioned earlier.
Right.
They sound pretty powerful.
Yeah, they're older citizens, former officials, people who've traveled abroad, gained some wisdom. They meet every day at dawn.
Okay, so that's why they're called nocturnal.
Yeah, it's a little bit contradictory.
It is kind of a weird name.
Yeah, right.
Like, what's the idea behind that meeting time?
Well, it suggests that they're free from other duties during the day. They can dedicate themselves to contemplation and discussion.
Right.
And initially, their role seems to be, more educational. They work with people who have been imprisoned for impiety, and they're trying to, kind of reform their beliefs.
So they're like philosophical rehab counselors.
Yeah, kind of. But I have a feeling there's more to it than that.
Yeah, there's got to be more, right?
Yeah. And things get really interesting in Book 12.
Uh-oh.
He kind of hints that the city should be handed over to the council, which has led to, tons of debate. Does this council have some kind of ultimate authority? Does that contradict everything he said about unchecked power?
Okay, now we're getting into conspiracy theory territory.
Right.
Are these wise elders, secretly pulling the strings in Magnesia? I mean, the city has an assembly, it has courts, all these other institutions.
Right.
It does make you wonder, does this nocturnal council actually have real political power?
It's the big mystery, right?
Yeah.
Are they more like an advisory body, just kind of, influencing decisions with their wisdom and experience? It's one of the most debated aspects of the laws.
Okay, I'm hooked. We're going to have to unpack this more, I think. But first, I want to talk about, how are these virtuous citizens actually raised in Magnesia? This whole system depends on them actually being good.
It does. And for Plato, education is key.
Okay.
But we're not just talking about reading, writing, arithmetic.
Right.
This is about shaping the soul itself, starting with this idea of correctly feeling pleasure and pain.
That's the one I've been waiting for. It sounds kind of intense. Tell me more.
It is intense. Oh, it's intense. Yeah. I mean, we usually think of education as knowledge, facts, skills, right?
Right.
But Plato is going deeper than that. He wants to shape how citizens emotionally respond to the world around them.
So is he brainwashing them into loving virtue? That sounds kind of, dystopian.
Not exactly brainwashing, no. It's more subtle than that. Think of it this way. From a very young age, education in Magnesia really emphasizes music and gymnastics.
Okay.
But, and this is important, it's not just any music or athletic training. It's very structured, harmonious, aimed at instilling a sense of order and beauty.
So it's like associating those positive feelings with what Plato sees as good. But how do you get from liking a song to actually being a just person? I mean, that's a big leap, isn't it?
Right. And that's where the ethical content comes in. So the music, the poetry, the stories they're exposed to, it's all carefully curated to emphasize tales of courage, moderation, justice. It's about subtly linking those virtuous actions to the pleasure they're already experiencing.
So it's like conditioning, but it's aimed at the soul, not just behavior.
Yeah, you could say that.
Is there any evidence this actually works, though? Can you really train someone to feel pleasure from doing the right thing?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's really hard to measure how effective this kind of education was, especially in the ancient world. But it's clear that Plato really believed that these early experiences would, form the foundation for a virtuous life.
And it's not just about childhood, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that education in Magnesia is a lifelong thing.
Oh, absolutely. It's completely woven into the fabric of their society. So citizens participate in these age-specific choruses, singing songs that reinforce these ethical principles. And even the elders, they gather in these symposia to discuss philosophy and keep their minds sharp.
Mm.
The idea is to keep the soul, quote unquote, young and malleable throughout life.
It's like a citywide commitment to personal growth.
Yeah.
I love that. But let's move beyond the music and gymnastics for a minute.
Mhm.
What about other subjects? I mean, they have to learn practical stuff too, right?
Of course. Yeah, in addition to the arts, there's a big emphasis on mathematics.
Okay.
Plato thought it was crucial for, developing abstract thinking, understanding the true nature of things. He even includes some pretty advanced concepts like incommensurability.
Okay, that one went over my head. What is incommensurability?
It's this idea that some quantities, you can't express them as a ratio of whole numbers.
Okay.
The classic example is the diagonal of a square and its side.
Mhm.
No matter how small you divide them, you'll never find a common unit of measurement.
Right, right. I vaguely remember that from geometry.
Yeah.
But what does that have to do with virtue? It seems pretty abstract.
Yeah.
Very mathematical.
Well, that's exactly the point. To really grasp incommensurability, you have to use reason, logic. You got to go beyond what you can just see and touch. Plato believed that this kind of intellectual discipline is essential for understanding higher truths, including the nature of goodness and justice.
So it's like training your mind to see beyond the surface,
Yeah,
to grasp those underlying principles of the universe.
exactly. And that kind of thinking, it's crucial for making wise choices, for governing yourself and your city justly. But math isn't the only way to achieve this. Plato also includes astronomy in Magnesia's curriculum.
Astronomy. So they're looking to the stars for guidance.
Kind of, yeah. For Plato, astronomy is not just about stargazing. It's about understanding the order and harmony of the cosmos, that divine intelligence that's governing the universe.
Right. Connecting to something bigger than yourself. Finding your place in the grand scheme of things.
Exactly. And this actually ties into Plato's theology, which he lays out in the laws. He's tackling big questions here, like what's the nature of the gods? Do they even care about humans? Can we influence them with our actions? He even addresses atheists.
Wow. Okay. So is he arguing for, like, the traditional Greek gods?
Not really. No, his view is much more philosophical. He argues that the orderly motion of the heavens, it points to this good, rational soul that's governing them. And that's what we call God in the laws.
Okay. So a more abstract philosophical conception of the divine. But that makes me wonder, if this God cares about the cosmos, why is there so much suffering and injustice in the world? It doesn't seem very orderly or harmonious, does it?
That's a question that's haunted philosophers for a long time. And Plato doesn't shy away from it. He acknowledges that evil exists, but he suggests that it comes from, a lack of understanding, a lack of virtue in humans, not from some flaw in the divine order itself.
So basically, we're the problem, not the gods.
That seems to be his view. And it's connected to the ethical core of the laws. Just as the divine aims for the best state of the cosmos, we as humans should strive for virtue. It's about aligning our actions with that cosmic order, contributing to the overall well-being of the universe.
That's a lot of responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
But it also raises a question for me. If we're supposed to be so focused on the good of the whole, what about individual happiness? Where does that fit in?
Right, and that's where things get really interesting. Plato argues that citizens shouldn't love themselves or even their possessions. They should love what is JCT.
Wait, hold on. Not even self-love. That seems pretty extreme, even for Plato.
It is radical, yeah.
Yeah.
And it directly challenges our modern emphasis on individualism. Plato believed that true happiness comes from aligning yourself with what is objectively good, with justice and virtue.
So, like, transcending your ego and finding fulfillment in something larger than yourself, that's a tough sell, even
Yeah.
for a philosophy enthusiast like myself.
It definitely challenges us to rethink our priorities, that's for sure. And remember, this is Magnesia we're talking about. It's Plato's ideal city. It's a blueprint for how things could be if everyone fully embraced virtue. Whether it's achievable in the real world, that's another question entirely.
It is a thought-provoking vision, but it also brings up some practical questions. For example, how much individual freedom do people really have in this system? And who gets to decide what's just anyway? Is it those philosopher kings, or is it someone else?
Excellent questions, and they really get to the core of that tension between individual and collective good, and that's something that runs throughout the laws. We're going to need to explore that a bit more as we go into the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, let's do it. I'm ready to tackle those big questions. Lead the way.
All right, so we've talked about this incredibly detailed city of Church in a bit. Plato's designed Magnesia with its unique laws and institutions, a whole education system all about creating virtue. But I keep coming back to this tension. How much individual freedom do people really have in a system like this? Yeah, that's one of the most challenging questions the laws raises, no doubt. I mean, Plato clearly puts the well-being of the city as a whole above individual desires. But we have to remember he also emphasizes persuasion and education,
Well,
right?
right.
So it's not about just blindly following rules, it's about understanding the reasons behind them.
So it's like you're giving up some freedom in exchange for living in this just and harmonious society. But then who gets to decide what's just in the first place? I mean, does this all come back to the philosopher kings like we saw in the Republic?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. The laws is actually less clear about who has the ultimate authority compared to the Republic. We've got the assembly, the courts, all these different magistrates, and then, of course, that mysterious nocturnal council.
Yeah, that council's still bugging me. Are they like philosopher kings in disguise? Or do they have a more limited role?
That's a debate scholars are still having today. Some argue that the council, with their focus on wisdom and experience, it represents a shift away from that philosopher king model. It's more towards a collective kind of leadership.
So instead of one brilliant person calling the shots, we had this group of elders deliberating, guiding the city.
Right.
That seems more in line with the emphasis on persuasion and, reasoned discourse that we've been talking about.
Exactly. It suggests that good governance isn't just about enforcing rules, but fostering this culture of, thoughtful deliberation, really considering those ethical implications of every decision.
That makes sense, but, it also makes me think, how do you make sure that the council actually represents the interests of everyone in the city?
Mhm.
And how do you stop them from becoming, just another power-hungry elite?
Those are the crucial questions. And honestly, Plato doesn't give us easy answers. He seems to be relying a lot on the idea that these elders, because of their age and experience, they've kind of reached a higher level of wisdom and virtue. But is that a realistic assumption? I don't know.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, even in Plato's ideal city, is there still this risk of corruption? That power might end up concentrated in the hands of just a few.
Absolutely. And it really highlights how important it is to be vigilant, to have ways to hold leaders accountable, and to make sure those laws are actually serving the common good.
So even in a city that's designed for virtue, you still need checks and balances, right? Institutions that keep any one person or group from having too much power.
Exactly. And that speaks to a bigger point about the laws in general. This isn't some kind of utopian fantasy where everything just runs perfectly. It's more realistic, although still idealized. It's an attempt to wrestle with the complexities of actually creating a just and harmonious society.
Yeah, it's like Plato's acknowledging that human nature is just inherently flawed. Even with the best intentions, the best laws, there are always going to be challenges, imperfections.
That's right. And that's why the laws emphasizes this idea of constant striving, of never giving up on pursuing virtue, even when it feels really hard or even impossible.
So it's not about reaching some perfect state of being. It's about this ongoing process, this journey of trying to live a good and just life, both individually and as a community.
Yes, exactly. And honestly, that's a message that's still so relevant today in a world that often feels very far from Plato's ideal. The laws challenges us to really think critically about our values, to examine our own behavior, and to work towards a better future, even if we know we might never fully get there.
It's a good reminder that creating a just and harmonious society, it's a journey, not a destination. It takes constant effort, reflection, and a willingness to face those tough questions.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And with that, I think we've come to the end of our deep dive into Plato's laws. We've explored the city of Magnesia, its laws, its institutions, its education system, even its theology.
We talked about individual freedom, the role of law, what leadership looks like, and, just that ongoing challenge of building a society that's just and virtuous. It's a lot to think about.
It is. And we hope this exploration has given you a fresh perspective on this work. It's complex, it makes you think, and it's definitely stuck with me.
Even though it was written, over 2,000 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
I think the laws still has so much to teach us about just being human, about the challenges of governing and, that age-old pursuit of the good life.
I agree.
So keep thinking about these questions, keep exploring these ideas, and maybe, just maybe, we can all do our part to make the world a little bit more like Plato's Magnesia.
Maybe we can.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep seeking wisdom.